With part 2 of energetics introduction. And I left you last time with this question. Uh, I burned 1,575 pounds of ATP. How is that possible if I don't weigh that much? My entire body is not composed of ATP. So hopefully you came up with the idea that ATP is recycled. ATP stores energy and it's used when it's broken apart. And then energy from food is used to reattach that phosphate. And so I'm constantly, while I'm riding, making and breaking down ATP. And like to think of ATP, it's often introduced to people as a high energy molecule. And it does store energy, but it's not that dense of an energy storage molecule. Glucose has way more energy than an ATP does. It's just that ATP is convenient to use for energy. An analogy, if you've been to Chuck E. Cheese or Funplex or something like that, you get these tokens that you can use to play all the games, and you put them in all the machines, and that's like ATP. It's useful in lots and lots and lots of different places, but it's heavy, and to carry around, say, $100 worth of tokens would be unwieldy. And so, like to think of glucose as like the $100 bill. You get a whole bunch of those tokens, and then you can use individual tokens in individual machines. In any case, I'm recycling that ATP. So you might wonder, why the heck would you ride your bike across the country? And when I was a kid, in like 6th grade, my family took a tent and we camped all across the country. We went to North Dakota, Utah, California, Arizona, all over the country. And we'd pitch the tent at night, sleep, get up, and go do some touring, and then drive down the road a bit and pitch the tent again. And so one night in Kentucky, these two college kids rode in. They were weighed down with all their equipment, and they pitched their tent, had their dinner, and we got to talking with them and found out that they were riding across the country. And then the next day we went and did a little bit of touring ourselves, and wound up at a campsite about 100 miles down the road. And just as we were getting our dinner ready, these same two guys rode into the campground, and it was then that I realized that you could actually use a bike to travel really long distances. And so I've kind of been on my list of things to do ever since. Also, I've struggled with my weight most of my life, and trying to stay fit or get fit, depending. I like riding the bike, and cycling's a pretty good solution for that. A couple of years before the ride, I'd done a cross Pennsylvania ride in 4 days, and just looking for a bigger thing. So need for larger and larger goals. It's also, when you fly over the country, you don't really see it. You don't get a feel for how big it is. And I can tell you that, when you pedal across the country, you get a really good handle on the size of things. Okay, so, I set out to record some physiological data, and here are some of the things that I did record. And I'm going to present a little bit of this information to you. And that is, so first, here's a picture, Anacortes, Washington on the left, and then Sandy Hook on the right, and you can see there's some significant differences. But let's look specifically at some data. And so here's some data, and the first thing I'd like you to consider is body mass index is a is a statistic that doctors use a lot. And you can see my body mass was 39.8 before, and then 37.4 after. And I'd like to take a look and consider, what category does that put me in. So I'm going to stop and have you think about that. Okay, so you should have decided that clearly I'm in the obese category, and I was an obese, and after the ride I was still an obese. So, didn't really change anything. Now I'm 65 inches tall. According to BMI charts, I would barely be normal if I weighed 150 pounds. This is a problem, as you'll see in a second. So if you look instead at fat percent, my body fat started out at 23, and then after moved to 18.6. So if you take a look under the column men and figure out, where was I before and where was I after. So I'll give you a second to think about that. And so obviously, I started at 23. I'm in this category here called average, and I'm kind of toward the top of average. And then after the ride, I'm down at 18.6, so I'm at the bottom of average, almost that fit category. So, these two measures give very different results, and I'd like you to think about why would fat percent give a different result from body mass index. So I'll give you a second to think about that. So hopefully you came up with the answer that the difference is that muscle and fat don't weigh the same, and so body mass index does not take into account that difference. So if you're fairly muscular, you might actually be considered obese by BMI when you're really not obese by body fat percentage. Okay, so is what I did a good experimental design? Should be obvious that the answer to that is no. And I'd like you to think about what I should have done to make it a good experiment. And then finally, consider, is what I did worthwhile? And before we wrap up here, I'd like to give you a cautionary note on body image. You need to understand that a person's worth does not depend on their looks or their body weight. And I know a lot of people feel badly about themselves because of how they look and how much they weigh. And this could be you weigh too little, you weigh too much, lots of different ways that people get emotionally hung up on these things. And so please, if you feel badly about yourself for any reason, you should talk to someone about it. It's not healthy to feel bad about yourself because of your weight. I'd also like to encourage you to find a sport or sports that you enjoy and can do your entire life. Being healthy and feeling good has a lot more to do with being active than it does with a number on a chart. So I'm going to leave you with that. Thanks for listening.